In April of 1936, another major comic strip syndicate would jump into the comic book business. King Features created King Comics. David McKay was the publisher who had done some comic books through King Features, and he had the job of doing this one with the editor Ruth Plumley Thompson. In it, Flash Gordon, Popeye, Mandrake the Magician would be some of the popular strips to make their appearances for the first time in the modern comic book format. Later on, the Lone Ranger, the Phantom, Prince Valiant, Blondie, Little Lulu would be some of the other popular strips to appear in the title. The comic would last 159 issues, running until 1952. Out of it would spring Standard Publishing, a comic book company with many different titles. King Comics #1, from David McKay Publications, with a cover date of April 1936, featured the first appearances in the comic book format of Flash Gordon by Alex Raymond, Brick Bradford, Henry, and Mandrake the Magician. And Popeye showed up with a Joe Musial gorilla cover for the premiere issue of the title that would run almost 2 decades. Overstreet does not list a price for any copies above VF, as it's very rare to find this book in super high grade condition after 80 years. The #1 issue features Joe Musial cover art. He did many of the covers, and this classic cover features Little King, Popeye, Wimpy, Henry, Sweepy, Olive Oil, Maggie, and Barney Google. King Features Syndicate Inc. is a print syndication company owned by the Hearst Corporation that distributes about 150 comic strips. William Randolph Hearst's newspapers began syndicating material in 1895 after receiving requests from other newspapers. In 1914, Hearst and his manager Moses Konigsberg consolidated all of Hearst's syndication enterprises under one banner. Konigsberg gave it his own name. The German word Konig means king. When he launched King Features Syndicate, production escalated in 1916, with King Features buying and selling its own staff-created feature material. Syndication peaked in the mid-1930s with 130 syndicates offering 1,600 features to more than 13,700 newspapers. William Randolph Hearst, born April 29, 1863, lived until August 14, 1951, an American newspaper publisher who built the nation's largest newspaper chain and whose flamboyant methods of yellow journalism influenced the nation's popular media by emphasizing sensationalism and human interest stories. Hearst entered the publishing business in 1887 after being given control of the San Francisco Examiner by his wealthy father. Eventually, he acquired 30 newspapers across America, and then expanding into magazines for his big empire. Twice elected as a Democrat in the U.S. House of Representatives, and he even ran unsuccessfully for mayor of New York City in 1905 and 1909. Peak circulation reached 20 million readers a day in the mid-1930s, but he was a bad money manager and was so deeply in debt that most of his assets had to be liquidated in the late 1930s. But he kept his newspapers and magazines. His life story was the main inspiration for Charles Foster Kane, the lead character in Orson Welles' film Citizen Kane. Joe Musial, born 1905, lived until June 6, 1977, an American comics artist and illustrator. After joining the staff of King's Feature Syndicate in 1932, he drew as a ghost artist for comic strips such as Blondie, Bringing Up Father, and Tilly the Toiler, and eventually Flash Gordon. Following the death of Charles H. Winner in 1956, he took over the comic strip The Katzenjammer Kids, the world's oldest continuing comic strip, until 1976. He was also the author of some books like Learn How Dagwood Splits the Atom in 1949 and Popeye, How to Draw Cartoons. In 1946, he was one of the first members of the then new-founded National Cartoonist Society, the NCS. He was brought to testify with Walt Kelly and Milton Caniff at the hearings of the U.S. Senate hearings, which led to the establishment of the famous Comics Code Authority in 1954. For the David McKay Company, he drew a great part of the covers of Magic Comics, King Comics, and Ace Comics. Clarence Gray, born November 14, 1901, lived until January 5, 1957, an American comic strip artist best known for his long run drawing the science fiction adventure strip Brick Bradford for more than 2 decades. In 1933, he created Brick Bradford with writer William H. Ritt, a columnist with the Central Press Association of Cleveland. The adventure strip quickly developed into one of the leading sci-fi strips of the 1930s. The daily comic strip was joined by a Sunday page in 1934. Billy DeBeck, born April 15th, 1890, lived until November 11th, 1942, an American cartoonist. He is most famous as the creator of the comic strip Barney Google, later retitled Barney Google and Snuffy Smith. The strip was especially popular in the 1920s and 30s and featured a number of well-known characters, including the title character, Bunky, Snuffy Smith, and Sparkplug the racehorse. Sparkplug, in fact, was a merchandising phenomenon and has been called the Snoopy of the 1920s. DeBeck drew with a scratchy line in a Bigfoot style in which characters had giant feet and big noses. His strips often reflected his love of sports. In 1946, the National Cartoonist Society inaugurated the Billy DeBeck Memorial Awards, or the Barney Awards, which later became the Rubin Award as of 1954. Nicholas Afonsky was a Russian artist born in 1892, wounded 5 times during World War I before boarding a ship to the U.S. in 1923. Afonsky did his first comics work for the Whelan Nicholson Inc. syndicate under the pen name Mietrich. In 1934, he started out drawing the Little Annie Rooney Sunday page that was created by Verdier and Walsh in 1927. He worked on the feature until 1943 and added the toppers, Fablets, and Ming Fu, the Oriental character introduced in the strip in 1934, and he got his own companion feature in 1935. Afonsky worked for King Features on Alex Raymond's Secret Agent X9 in 1938, and he passed away in 1943 and was succeeded on Little Annie Rooney by Darrell McClure. Carl Thomas Anderson, born February 14, 1865, lived until November 4, 1948, an American cartoonist best remembered for his comic strip Henry. Readers followed the pantomime adventures of the mute, bald-headed Henry in strips. In 1933, he sold his first Henry cartoon to the Saturday Evening Post for $50, and it became a regularly weekly feature in the magazine. Within only months, Henry was being published in 50 newspapers, including 15 of Hearst's papers. Anderson continued to work on the strip until his death in 1948. Jack Burnley, born January 11, 1911, lived until December 19, 2006, was the pen name of Hardin J. Burnley, American comic book artist and illustrator. Burnley was the first artist after co-creator Joe Shuster to draw a Superman in the comic books. Jack Burnley began his comics career working for the King Features Syndicate, providing cartoons for the sports section. His first published DC Comics assignment was the cover for New York World's Fair 1940, the second annual, which portrayed Superman with Batman and Robin, the first time the trio had ever appeared together in print. Burnley went on to provide uncredited artwork for Action Comics until 1947, and Burnley co-created with writer Gardner Fox the superhero Starman, which first appeared in Adventure Comics in 1941. He became DC's top ghost artist, working on the main characters and titles. In addition to penciling over 100 covers, he also worked briefly in 1944 as the penciler on both the Batman and Superman Sunday comic strips. Charlie Schmidt was one of the creators of Radio Patrol. The daily strip came about in 1933 when the editors of the Boston Daily Record assigned Charlie Schmidt and Eddie Sullivan to invent a detective strip, which ran until 1946, the Sunday strip running until 1950. During the 30s, the popular comic was adapted for radio and a movie serial. Lee Falk, born April 28, 1911, lived until March 13, 1999, an American writer, theater director, and producer, best known as the creator of the popular comic strips The Phantom in 1936 and Mandrake the Magician in 1934. At the height of their popularity, these strips attracted over 100 million readers every day. Falk also wrote short stories and contributed to a series of pulp novels about the Phantom. And as a playwright and theatrical director and producer, he directed actors such as Marlon Brando, Charlton Heston, and Paul Newman. Philip Davis, born March 4th, 1906, lived until December 16th, 1964, better known as Phil Davis, an American artist who illustrated Mandrake the Magician, written by Lee Falk. The strip was launched June 11th, 1934, with Davis illustrating and Falk scripting. Davis continued drawing it until his death in 1964. Nat Edson, born in 1909, lived until 2001, a ghost artist on the Tim Tyler's Luck daily strip from 1934 to 1945. Tim Tyler's strips appeared in King Comics starting in 1936. He was an artist who created numerous adventure and western strips for Dell from 1950 to 1972. and he illustrated Toby Tyler, Zorro, and many others. He also drew adventure comics for Quality, Lafayette, DC, and Standard in the 40s, and illustrated some episodes of Tarzan. L.Z. Chrysler Cigar, born December 8, 1894, lived until October 13, 1938. Known professionally as E.C. Cigar, was an American cartoonist best known as the creator of Popeye, a pop culture character who first appeared in 1929 in Cigar's comic strip Thimble Theater. The strip made its debut on December 19, 1919, featuring the character Olive Oyl. A decade later, on January 17, 1929, when Castor Oyl needed a mariner to navigate his ship to Dice Island, Castor picked up an old salt down by the docks named Popeye. Popeye's first line in the strip upon being asked if he was a sailor was, "D'ya think I'm a cowboy?" The character stole the show and became the permanent star. Popeye became a forerunner to superheroes and is one of the most important characters of the 20th century. Cigar is widely regarded as one of the most influential and talented cartoonists of all time, among the first to combine humor with long-running adventures. Alex Raymond, born October 2, 1909, lived until September 6, 1956, an American cartoonist best known for creating Flash Gordon for King Features in 1934. The strip was subsequently adapted into many other media, from a series of movie serials from 1936 to 1940 to a 70s TV show and even a 1980 movie. Flash Gordon was created as competition to Buck Rogers as the most popular sci-fi comic strip in the world. Alex Raymond later created another popular strip in 1946 titled Rip Kirby, a popular comic strip featuring the adventures of the lead character, a private detective, which he created in 1946. Lou Hanlon was the artist of the daily crime comic G-Man that appeared with scripts by George Clark in the Chicago Tribune from 1935 to 1940. Hanlon was furthermore a sports cartoonist and a member of the National Cartoonist Society. G-Man appeared in comics starting with King Comics #1 in 1936. George McManus, born January 23, 1884, lived until October 22, 1954, an American cartoonist best known as the creator of Irish immigrant Jiggs and his wife Maggie, the main characters of his syndicated comic strip Bringing Up Father. In 1904, McManus created the first American family comic strip, The Newlyweds, about an elegant young couple and their baby Snickums. In 1913, he created Bringing Up Father, which achieved great success up until his death. McManus said that Bringing Up Father had earned him $12 million during his lifetime. Otto Saglo, born December 23, 1900, lived until April 3, 1975, an American cartoonist best known for his comic strip The Little King, which first appeared in the New Yorker in 1930, running until his death in 1975. Clayton Knight, born March 30th, 1891, living until July 17th, 1969, is a member of the Order of the British Empire and an American aviator during World War I. He was aviation artist and illustrator and is known for being one of the founders of the Clayton Knight Committee and the illustrator of the comic strip Ace Drummond. Distributed by King Features Syndicate, the comic strip ran as a Sunday page from 1935 to 1940. According to his autobiography, at its peak, the strip ran in 135 newspapers, and in 1936, the strip was adapted into a movie serial. Charles Flanders, born 1907, lived until 1973, an American artist who had greatest success drawing already established titles. He took over Secret Agent X9 from Alex Raymond, which he continued until 1938, and he continued The King of the Royal Mounted, Sunday page from 1936, and became the sole artist on the strip as of 1938. A year later, he was assigned to Franz Stryker's The Lone Ranger, which he would draw for the next 33 years. And Ruth Plumley Thompson, born July 27, 1891, lived until April 6, 1976, an American writer of children's stories best known for writing many novels placed in Oz, the fictional land of L. Frank Baum's classic children's novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and its sequels. Between 1921 and 1939, she wrote one Oz book a year. She had stories in comic books starting with King Comics #1 in 1936. This was David McKay's first ongoing monthly series, debuting in April 1936, and would run for many years and featured many of the top characters, artists, and writers of the time.